I'm Sarah, and it's been a while. I started this booktube back in October or sometime last fall, and then I pretty promptly took a hiatus for a bunch of different reasons. I thought with this new year, I would get back into it, and a shout out to Ben at Benjamin Journal for sending me a little message and asking about this booktube. I think with his just his inquiring about it, it really made me think about getting back into it. And so now I'm making this video. So today I have my 23 for 2023 books that I thought I would share with you, as well as some other reading goals that I have for this year. But let's first get into the books. So the first grouping of books that I have are authors that I can't believe I haven't read yet, and that I want to make sure that I finally get to this year. The first being Magda Sasbo. This is actually the book that I'm currently reading, and I'm reading it for Ben's book club, which I'm really excited to be a part of and to take part in that conversation. I chose actually The Door for this year in general, even though I also own Abigail, because I just feel like tons of people have read and loved this. And it was just coincidental that Ben had picked it for his book club. So I thought it was kismet and I should definitely pick it up. I'm very early in the book. I'm only like 30 pages in. Thought I would have read more by now, but I'll read a bunch this weekend. I'm really liking it so far, even though I'm only 30 pages in. The premise is basically you find out in the very first chapter, the first like 3 pages of the book, that the narrator has killed their housekeeper. And then it kind of takes you back to when the housekeeper started with this husband and wife and how that came to be. So it's really, really good. I really am liking the narration, and I think I'm going to become a fan of Magda's writing and move on to Abigail at some point as well. Next, I have Alice Munro's Dear Life. I actually own quite a few of Alice Munro's, so if it's not this one, it will be a Alice Munro, but I haven't read anything from her. I just have this feeling like I'm really going to love her writing. And this, as well as most of the ones that I own, are short story collections. I think that's primarily how she writes. I do have one novel from her, but she has way more short story collections than she has novels, I believe. So I think I want to get into her short stories, since that seems to be where her strength lies. I heard from a lot of people that they love her writing and her short stories, so I'm really looking forward to it. Next, I have Toni Morrison's Sula. I have not read any Toni Morrison, and honestly, it's a crime. I feel like as a reader, Toni Morrison is someone you have to read within your lifetime, and Sula is where I've decided to start on my Morrison journey. I've heard a couple people say that Sula is a good place to start. It's also a pretty slim novel, so I feel like it's nothing very intimidating. I know it has to do with female friendship, which is a theme I really enjoy, and I think there's a haunting aspect to her writing as well, especially in this one. So we'll see. I think it's another author that's going to become a favorite, and I have quite a few Morrisons on my shelf that I can get through if I really enjoy this one. Next is The Quick and the Dead by Joy Williams. I've been wanting to get into Joy Williams for a while now, and I just didn't know where to start because she's, to me, a little bit of an intimidating author. Not too long ago on Jalen of Bar in the Bookcase and Reading the Room podcast, he had, I believe it was Tess Gunty that talked about it. Jalen had asked Tess where to start with Joy Williams, and this was one of her suggestions. This is a novel. She also suggested her short stories, and I have that as well, but I thought I'd start with the novel. I thought that the premise sounded a bit more appealing to me, and I'm more of a fan of novels than I am short stories. So I thought I would start with this and then move on to the short stories if I enjoyed it. Next is A Journal of a Solitude by May Sarton. Lots of people love this book, and I really want to finally get to it. I originally heard about this book from Rebecca at Rebecca Eats Books, and then I know Julie at Linden Librarian recently read this one and loved it. So I know that it's going to be a favorite of mine. I am a human who enjoys solitude, and I feel like these journal entries and May Sarton's writing is going to really resonate with me. So I'm really, really looking forward to this one. Next is Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. I also own Sexing the Cherry, The Passion, and Oranges Are Not the Only Fruit, but I thought I would start with this one just because I feel like this is an especially famous one of hers. It's supposed to be quite a sexy book, so I feel like it's good to throw in here. It's a little bit different from some of the other books that I've chosen. And I've just heard so many people talking about it and loving it. I've also recently heard a few people have read Sexing the Cherry and really liked it, so I'd like to get to that one as well if I can, but I thought I would read this one first. Next is an Iris Murdoch. I picked A Severed Head as my first Murdoch. I have quite a few of hers. She's one of those authors that every time I'm in a used bookshop, I will automatically pick up the ones I find from her, even though I haven't read her yet. But I feel like she's going to be somebody I really enjoy. And I decided to start with A Severed Head because from what I've heard, it's a little bit of a romp. It's everyone sleeping with everyone. It seems to be funny and a little bit lighter of a novel. And it's quite a short one as well, which I think if I'm diving into a new author who has a very long backlist, it makes sense to me to start with something a little bit shorter before diving into a much chunkier book. So I think this is a good way to tell if I would like to continue my journey of reading Iris Murdoch. Next is The Heart is a Lonely Hunter by Carson McCullers. I can't believe that I haven't read any Carson McCullers. I've had this on my shelf for an embarrassing amount of time. I'm also going to be buddy reading this with Renee of So I Read This Book. I'm really excited about that. It is a little bit of a chunkier book, so I feel like those are the books that are really ripe for discussion and have a lot to talk about. I did this past year read my autobiography of Carson McCullers by Jen Shapland, and I did not get on with that book really at all. I had a lot of issue with things in that book, but it did make me want to read something by actual Carson McCullers and see if I like their writing. I really think I will, and this is definitely their most famous novel, I believe, even though Member of the Wedding and a few of her others are also really well known. I think this one is kind of a good start to her writing. So those were all the authors that I haven't yet read. So the next little stack of authors are authors that I read in the past year or two, and I want to just continue reading through their canon and getting to know them more. So the first author in that section is Queen Patti Smith. I love Patti Smith. I've read 3 of her books so far. I've read Wool Gathering, Devotions, and Year of the Monkey, but all 3 of them were quite short, and this one is a little bit longer of a book, and I'm really excited to spend more time with Patti in one book. I also really want to read Just Kids, which is another one of her books, which is a little bit longer. I don't own that one yet, so eventually I will get to that one, but I'm excited for M Train. I know people really love this one. Next is Clarice Lispector. I've only read, I think, one Clarice Lispector so far, The Hour of the Star, and I loved it. It was so good. I think I read it the year before last, so I don't know why I haven't picked up another one, but I have this one, Near to the Wild Heart, and this, I think, was the first one she'd written. She was only 19 when she wrote this book, so I'm excited to see kind of where her writing started and then continuing along her backlist. I also have the book that starts an apprenticeship or on my shelves, so maybe I'll try and fit in that one this year as well, but I'm really looking forward to this one. Next is Edna O'Brien's Night. I've only read one Edna O'Brien. It was very tiny. It was called James and Nora, and it's a mostly nonfiction account of James Joyce and his wife's story and the relationship, and it was really cheeky and funny, and I really enjoyed Edna O'Brien's writing, so I knew that I wanted to get into some of her fiction, because I think while she might have elaborated a little bit within that story, it wasn't fiction. It was very much a nonfiction book, and it was quite tiny. I think it was only 45 pages or something like that, so it was a very introductory account of her writing. And so I'm looking forward to getting to something that's fiction and a little bit longer. This is still a tiny book, but I've seen a few people reading this one more recently and really liking it. Next, Chelsea Girls by Eileen Myles. I've only read one Eileen Myles. I forget the name of it. It's part of the same collection of Patti Smith's devotions from Yale, where a bunch of writers wrote these tiny books about their writing process, and Eileen Myles was one of them. So I've only had a very small snippet of their writing, but I really, really enjoyed it, and I think I will really enjoy Chelsea Girls as well. And I own Inferno, so it would be great if I can get to both of those. Eileen Myles is someone that I want to be well versed in, and this one I am buddy reading with Clara from Chapters of Clara on Instagram. I will link everybody down below so you know who I'm talking about. And I'm really looking forward to that buddy read. And lastly on the list of authors I want to read more of is Maggie Nelson, The Argonauts. I think I've only read Jane from Maggie Nelson, which is crazy because she's such a smart, incredible writer that I don't know why I haven't read more from her. She is a little bit intimidating. Her intellect is just astounding. Every time I hear her interviewed, it's always just, I feel like my own brain is getting bigger just listening to her. So I'm really excited to get to The Argonauts. I know this has a lot of reference in it, and it's also a story about Maggie Nelson's partner going through transition. So I think it's going to be both emotional and also incredibly intellectual. And thanks to Renee and Ben, who read this last year, I know that this is a book that, while quite slim, is one you really have to carve out some time for and really sit with and give attention to. It's not a quick, breezy read, and it's one that's really smartly written. So I want to make sure that I give it the time it deserves. Okay, those were all the authors that I just want to read more of. And then the last group of books are just books that I've either been wanting to read for a long time or were really excited about that were on my shelf, and I wanted to make sure I got to this year. So the first of those is Unquiet by Lynn Ullman. I haven't seen this around very much, either BookTube or Instagram. I know Renee had mentioned it at one point as a book she wants to read, but it is blurbed by both Rachel Cusk and Allie Smith on the back, so I can't believe this has not been more widely read, or maybe I just haven't seen who has been reading it. But it sounds great. I got this not last Christmas, but the Christmas before. So I've had it for over a year and I need to read it. It is a little bit chunkier of a book, which is why I've been avoiding it and haven't picked it up yet. But this is the year. And just this one sentence on the back, since it is a more unfamiliar book, it says, a heartbreaking and darkly funny depiction of the intricacies of family. Unquiet is an elegy of memory and loss, identity and art, growing up and growing old. So sounds really good. And if both Rachel Cusk and Allie Smith are recommending this book, then it's definitely one that I want to read. The next one is Rachel Cusk herself and the Outline Trilogy. I have only read Second Place by Rachel Cusk, and I feel like if you are going to be reading Rachel Cusk, the Outline Trilogy is definitely what you need to be reading. This is the year. This counts as all three. So it's a little bit of a cheat in this 23 for 2023 because I am counting all three books as I hold this up, because I would like to get through the entire trilogy. And I have quite a few Rachel Cusks, if you can see in that corner. But I feel like I shouldn't read any more of her until I get through this trilogy, especially since I read Second Place not last year, but the year before, and it was one of my favorite books of the year, maybe one of my favorite books of all time. I really loved it. So I can't believe I haven't gotten to more Cusk since then, but this is the year of the Outline Trilogy for sure. And speaking of cheating at this 23 for 2023, I'm also counting all four books of this Elena Ferrante quartet. I read My Brilliant Friend years ago, a very long time ago. I think when this first came out, I'm pretty sure. And for some reason, I think probably because the other books weren't out yet, I just kind of forgot about this series. But now, having read more Ferrante, The Lost Daughter is absolutely one of my favorite books. I want to make sure I get the rest of this read, and it will start with a reread of this first one because my memory is terrible, and aside from the story starting when the two girls are very young, I remember almost nothing from this book. So it definitely needs a reread, and I will be buddy reading this quartet with Ashley of the Social Work Bookworm on Instagram. We're starting this first one next month, and I'm very much looking forward to it. And then I'm sure we'll read them just throughout the year, but I can't wait to get back into this. Next is Cassandra at the Wedding by Dorothy Baker. I actually already read this one this month. I did a buddy read with Sophie at BiblioSophie, and we read it together, and I loved it. It's so rare for me to get so absorbed into a book that it feels like nothing else around me exists, but this story really just sucked me in, and I really loved reading the narration of Cassandra, and I'll talk further about this book in a wrap-up, but just a quick synopsis. It's essentially about two twin girls, Cassandra and Judith, and Cassandra goes back to her hometown because Judith is getting married, and the story unravels from there. It's very much about these two girls growing up kind of as one entity or almost one person, and now Judith has become her own person and very separate from Cassandra, and there's an unraveling from Cassandra from that. And Cassandra is very much a DWM type character. She's artsy and interesting and nuanced, and I feel like Judith is supposed to be quite a polar opposite, and she's quite plain and ordinary. And I really like the way Dorothy Baker played with that as well. So highly, highly recommend this, and I will definitely be looking to read more Dorothy Baker in the future. Next, Housekeeping by Marilynne Robinson. I actually started this book last year, I think sometime in September or October, and it was just a time of the year that got really busy for me. I felt really distracted, and this is a book that I feel like needs your full attention, or at least for me, I could tell that this book was going to be a favorite of mine. The sentences were so beautiful. I loved the writing. I wanted to absorb every single word, and I just felt like I was in a headspace where my mind would start wandering as I was reading, or I was just distracted in general. So I put it down for the time being, thought I would pick it up before the end of the year, but instead I decided to read it this year, and I'm going to give it a quiet weekend to really be able to give it my full attention and to absorb it, because I think it's going to be a favorite of mine. Next, Nightwood. This is another Rebecca Eats Books influence. I saw that she read this and really loved it, and it sounds like something that's going to really change your reading and just be a real experience, because this, as it says on the back, it's a strange and sinuous tour de force, has become a classic of modernist and lesbian literature since its first publication in 1936. So I think it's maybe one that went under the radar because it was ahead of its time for a long time. So I think it's going to be really good. Really looking forward to it. Next is Paradise Rat by Jenny Haval. This is one I bought a while ago, and I thought I would read it immediately, and for some reason I still haven't gotten to it. I watched Katie James' top books of 2022, and this was on it, and it kind of just reminded me that I finally need to get to this book. It's a pretty short book, and I think it's pretty readable. The font is quite big in it, so I do think it'll be a pretty quick read. So this year, I'm finally getting to this one. Next is Helen DeWitt's The Last Samurai. I do want to read this one very much, but this is also representative of all the chunkier books that I want to read this year. It's pretty chunky, and there are a bunch of books that I kind of skipped over last year because I was trying to read more, which meant shorter books, tinier books. But this year I do want to read more chunky books, and this one especially. Everyone I've seen that has read this has loved it, so I'm really looking forward to diving into something where I can spend more time with the story and the character. Next is The Stillest Day by Josephine Hart. I heard about this book from Ben at Benjamin Journal, And his review of this book just made it sound so beautiful, so appealing. This is kind of a more under the radar book, it seems. I've only seen Ben talk about it. Since then, I've seen a couple people say that they were going to pick it up. To read a little bit of the back, since it's not a super well-known book. It says, Bethesda Barnett is an artist and teacher. Her village life with an invalid mother is ordered and calm until the sudden vision of a man's face imprints itself on her mind's eye and she becomes a woman obsessed. Yes, please, sign me up. That sounds great. Sounds very DWM, but also Ben had mentioned the writing is really beautiful. So I think this is going to be a really good one. And lastly, The Wall by Marlon Haushofer. I first heard about this book from an interview with Sheila Heti. Sheila Heti was talking about the reprinting of this book from New Directions, and she was also saying how it's one of her favorite books, and not a lot of people have read it, and it's completely underrated. So I immediately pre-ordered it after hearing that interview, and yet I still have not picked it up. So this is the year that I'm getting to it. And since then, I've seen quite a few people read it and love it. Specifically Julie from London Librarian. I really need to get to it. And it's essentially dystopian. It's about a woman who lives alone on a farm, and then one day this kind of invisible wall goes up around her property, and all she can see on the other side is it looks like everyone else is dead. So then it's kind of a journal type style writing of her survival and her growing her garden to survive and to eat and taking care of her animals. And it sounds great. It sounds very internal, very thinky woman, and I think I'm really gonna love it. And those are all the books. A couple other goals that I have this year. I would like to read at least 50 books. Last year I set a goal of 100, and honestly for me it was too much. I felt myself sacrificing other areas of things in order to make sure I finished a book or got another book in. Mostly exercise, which is really not good for your mental health, even though reading I find is very good for that. I've now reintegrated yoga back into my routine, which has been really good for me. I used to do it every day, and I'm starting to do that again. I just also felt like I was picking up the tiniest books I could find so I could move through books faster, which is really, it's no way to read. Reading should be about the books you want to read, even if it's a 500-page book that's going to take you 3 weeks, it shouldn't matter. So I kind of want to read a little bit more with that in mind this year. And 5 of the books that I read this year need to be chunky books. So The Last Samurai is going to be one of them. The Ferrante Quartet certainly falls within those limits. To me, a chunky book is just at least 300 pages because I love a 250, 200 page book. So anything over 300 is challenging me to read something longer. So I think those will probably be the 5, but I'm hoping to fit in a few more outside of those, especially since I have a bunch on these shelves that I just haven't gotten to, and I would like to give them some attention. Also, 10 books that I read, so at least a 5th of my reading I want to be nonfiction. I do have a few in this stack that are nonfiction, so that's good, but I also have a few more on my shelves. The Right to Sex comes to mind. I have a few Adrienne Riches that I'd really like to get to. So I'm hoping for more nonfiction this year because I tend to be a big fiction reader. And while that's great, I definitely want to integrate more nonfiction into my reading. And those are pretty much my reading goals. I'm not doing anything crazy, just like a few simple goals. And I think as far as this channel goes, I'll probably do more talk videos, kind of like this. Vlogs to me for some reason seemed like a lot, and to be honest, in the winter in Vermont, I'm not very exciting. I pretty much just read or do stuff at home. I'm not a big winter sports person, so there's not a lot going on in the winter up here, so I'm pretty boring. So maybe once the weather gets warm again, I will do more vlogs, but for now it'll probably be wrap-ups. And if there's any other videos that you guys want to see, please let me know. I know that during my hiatus, I missed a couple Prime videos there at the end of the year that a lot of people were doing. I know I didn't do a top books of 2022, so if you still want to see that, I can certainly make that video, even though it's almost the second month of the new year, but I'm happy to still put that up. I read a lot of really good books last year, a lot that I think will be all-time favorites for me. As far as other updates, I don't watch a ton, but I did recently watch the Banshees of Inisherin and I loved it. It was quite depressing and dark. I don't think I was expecting the level that it was, but it was still really beautiful and really good. And I thought Colin Farrell was so good in it, as well as Brandon Gleeson, who I love everything he does pretty much. And if anyone hasn't seen The Guard, which he's also in and incorporates some of that Irish humor, I highly recommend it. That is a great movie, and one of the reasons why I wanted to watch this one, because Brandon Gleeson is just so dryly funny, in like a really dark way too. Really good. Highly recommend. I also finally watched White Lotus. I binged both seasons. A lot of people are watching that show. It's not a new recommendation, but I really loved both seasons. I think Jennifer Coolidge is brilliant. I loved Aubrey Plaza in the second season. And if you were considering watching it and haven't yet, definitely watch it. It's really, really good. And I think that's about it. So thank you so much for watching. Please tell me what you're excited to read this year. If you have a top 23 or just a top 5 that you are really looking forward to, tell me if there's any of these from this stack that I need to get to sooner rather than later. I'm equally excited about all of them, so I kind of have no order as to how I'm going to read them. And otherwise, I will catch you in the next one.